Hello friends, here with Lonesome Gamer, and I'm playing 1856. This is probably going to be the last video of the series. There's not too much money left in the bank, maybe about 5,000 or so, and there goes some more money into the bank because we're going to buy shares from the Canadian. But overall, I think it will not be enough to last for the complete cycle of operating rounds. So we are now in the stock round. Priority lies here, and everybody has a ton of money. So we're definitely going to see lots of investment here. There is, of course, the certificate limit, and I'm pretty sure every player will go right up to the certificate limit during this stock round. That means that the players who hold the presidencies have an advantage because presidency is worth 2 shares, and therefore they can simply hold more shares for each presidency they have. There's not much left to invest in. The most interesting one is, without a doubt, the Canadian government railways. Probably everyone will invest as much money as possible in the Canadian. I think there were, let me see, about 15 shares or so left. So technically every player could buy 3 shares of the Canadian, and every player has the money to do that. However, there is the certificate limit, and I'm not sure if that allows every player to do it, but I could also imagine that some players will sell other shares because the Canadian is so powerful. It is the most valuable company at the moment, and it will also make probably the biggest runs. So yeah, let's start. So now players are in the situation where there is nothing left to invest in, but some of them are not quite at the certificate limit. I think actually all of them, but most of them still have money. So it's important to remember that if the 5% shares are used, each certificate of the CGR only counts as half a certificate. Which means that these guys can hold, for example, 2 more shares or 2 more certificates. So and same with him. And some others could hold 1 additional certificate. So he's probably going to start a new company at that point. We need to sell 6 shares to do so. But he says, hey, if I start a new company at that point, I'm pretty sure others will also invest in it. And if that should not be the case, I could still sell 2 or 3 of my shares. I mean, it would kind of suck because these are good shares and I don't want to sell them. But on the other hand, if I start the TGB, for example, I can pretty soon hook up here, for example. Oops. And then make, for example, 2 good runs with a D train or something, which would give me some additional money. However, you know, if someone doesn't invest in a TGB, they could maybe try to somehow cut me off then, before I actually, you know, if someone places some kind of strange tile here or something, I might end up with trouble. So it's not that clear. That's kind of the question. Do I want to risk it? At that point, most of the companies are somehow connected to this specific point. I think all of them except the CPR actually. So if someone places, let's say, one of these things like this, they can pretty much isolate me. And can they? I think in this, well, yeah, I think they actually could. Yeah, that would suck. So I can actually not really risk to do this, because that could kind of, the question is who comes next. I mean, if let's say who goes first, who can lay track first. Maybe I can make a deal with someone. For example, if this guy with the Grand Trunk goes first, I'm pretty sure we can make a deal, because we both have something like 2 or 3 certificates that we can still buy. So it's also in his interest to invest. And so if I place a token here, he could already hook me up then, before someone else has the option to do so. So who would go first? Well, the CGR would go first. The CGR, I mean, they could also invest, but only 1 share. So that's a tough call. I mean, I think it's not such a big deal, you know. If I should invest and things go wrong, I might lose maybe $100 overall, or $90 or something, because I can buy 3 shares, and so if the share value drops, let's say from 100, I would lose $75. 3 spaces, I would lose $25 per share. On the other hand, there's also not that much to gain. I mean, the first operating round it will drop, and the second it will rise again, and then I don't know if it's such an important thing to do. On a 1 to 2, I will do it. Okay, so I'm gonna open up the TGB for the last operating rounds. Now remember, from this phase on, we have a full capitalization. So as soon as 60% of a company are sold, the company must operate, or can operate, and it will then get a starting capital of 10 times the share value. So there is also no big risk here. If nobody invests, for example, now, he doesn't have to buy a train or so. It's not necessary for him to do so, because the company simply cannot operate. Actually, I'm not even sure if the share value would move that way if there isn't, probably, but because it's not a company that can operate, I don't know. I don't know about that. I got to check that, if that should be the case. So there was a consideration now of not buying shares of the new founded company. Simply hoping that this guy then will lose money. But I checked the rules, and I'm not absolutely sure about that. But I think as long as the company doesn't operate at all, the share value will also not drop. And therefore, it actually doesn't matter if the money sits here on the table or in the company. So there is no damage if the company doesn't work. It's a different thing if you are short on money and you invest your money in a company and you can make it run, obviously, because then the money is gone and you don't earn anything. But at that point, when your money is lying on the table and it doesn't earn you anything anyway, it doesn't matter. So therefore, these guys might as well make that new company run. So he buys himself a share of the TGB. So 70% of the company have been sold. That means we start the company with $1,000. And we'll see if it was worth it or not. I mean, it's probably very little earnings that we gain out of this overall. But, you know, if it's just a little bit, it might have been worth it. So, let's now start. CGR will start the first operating round. And pretty sure we're going to see a massive run here. Massive run. The CGR went from here down there and made that loop here through here and just like this. 710. This is really insane. And of course they're going to pay out. So that gives everyone quite a bit of money. But again, these two guys here, they get the most of it. I think he's in the lead overall. Well, actually, that's kind of interesting. They don't get that much money because these are only 5% shares. So this guy holds only 25%. So that gives him about, I think, 175. So it's not that crazy. But of course, the value of the shares themselves is a lot. It will rise about $25. So he gets another 125 simply from the rising share value. So these are definitely worth it. So we're seeing runs beyond the 700 of the CGR and also the CV. Let's take a look at the GT. They have a 5 and a 6 train. But they also profit now from this connection here. So that is 70, 170, 200, 250. That's the 5 train. 350, 390, 430. Wait a minute, it's not that simple. So this is actually, let me see. Yeah, so basically they got to go like this. So this is 350, 390, 450, 480, and another $90 here. So that is 570. Yeah, that's also pretty decent run, but at that point it's not quite as good at the D runs anymore. So now the TGB starts and they could hook up here, and someone else helped him, by the way. So They're doing fine. An interesting factor is now, here in the Canadian, would have been now enough money to buy a 6 train. We get about 800 bucks in there or so, maybe even 900. Sadly, this sucker will get that 6 train. However, it's still enough money to upgrade the 5 train to a D train. So that is something that the Canadian Pacific will do. But for now, this guy will buy this last 6 train. And there we go. The share value will drop as predicted, but from now on he can make a run and maybe earn, especially this guy, a little money. The end of the first operating round, it's now this player. He will buy a he will upgrade this into a D train. And I think I might as well do the upcoming operating rounds off camera, except we see something really exciting happening, which I doubt is possible. Well, actually, there's an interesting option. This guy has enough money to upgrade to a D train, and in addition, plays a token. And I think that's what I want to do. Because if I work together with Canadian, I might be able to block a city, and in that way maybe to destroy these massive routes for some of the D trains. So I'm actually considering placing a marker here. And yeah, that sounds pretty good. If I can place a marker of the Canadian, well, fuck, I don't have that marker. It's not really worth it then. I don't have the money to do it. Question is, swallowing to block, is it worth it? Well, it might be actually. It could be worth it. You know, everybody holds pretty much the same amount of shares of the Canadian. So I don't win that much. Or I don't lose that much compared to the others if I swallow. Just a little. But the others would lose a lot if I can block out this here. However, I could not do it in the next turn, but only in the turn after that. And that might be too late then, because the game ends too early. We got to see. That's going to be close. Because if we can block this here, the runs will decrease quite a bit, and maybe then the game could go on for another cycle of operating rounds. So we'll see about that. So a real spectacular run here of the CGR 870. That is simply insane. Basically, they start up here, Canadian West, go down here, Barrie, Toronto, then they go this way here, then up here, Goderich, then they go down here, they go London, this way here, continue down here, that way here, here, through here, Hamilton, and then all the way down to here. So yeah, totally crazy. So the LPS now also managed to do a 710 run, and it's kind of interesting because we now have this second east-west route here. You know, there was always this one here, and that was kind of blocked, so doing a loop like this was pretty hard. But now we have a second route here, and now they could go from here, basically up here like this, then here, and from there they went up here. and then went this way here, like this, down here, and then made the stuff up down here. So that was a really successful run here. So we start now the third operating round, and you can see 200, 3, 4, I don't know, let's make it 6. Maybe there are about, maybe 1,000 or so are left in the bank. So the bank is definitely going to break in this operating round, and I'm going to add now a new money to, that I can still use money here. But as I said, it's just for one more operating round, and I probably come back then with the wrap. Okay, so I'm finally done, and wow, that last cycle of operating rounds really dragged on. So I haven't counted the share value yet, but it seems like this guy here, that player, the president of the Credit Valley, he's definitely in the lead when it comes to cash. I think it's about 2,000, 3,500. So he's basically at 4,000. What about him here? He's also doing good, 2,500. Yeah, but this is just 3,000, so he's $1,000 behind. He's also nearly at 3,000. 2,000. He's even further behind, 2,500. So this guy, I mean, seems like this guy is pretty far ahead. And then it's kind of between these three people. The owner of the Canadian Pacific seems clearly to be behind. He also only owns the Canadian Pacific shares, are not worth a lot. So yeah, I'm pretty sure he will fall. He will be last. He might win it, although the Credit Valley is not quite as valuable as the THB. But then again, he also holds 3 shares of the THB. So we'll see where this goes, and we'll see who comes then in second. So yeah, we have a clear winner. It is, as expected, at least at the end, the president of the Credit Valley, who had also the most cash. And he's at 7,632, which is about $900 ahead of the second player, who was the one here of the Toronto Hamilton and Buffalo and the Toronto Grey and Bruce, with 6,746. Kind of interesting. I think that this player actually had a really rough start, and he felt that he was behind for quite a while actually. But I think when he made that 4-train purchase, even though he didn't really need it, that was a very wise move, which probably saved him the game. And also the co-production with the Wellington Grey and Bruce and the Credit Valley, he probably played these two really cleverly together, so that he ended up with this very strong railroad here. And also the decision to buy that last 5-train. First it looked like a questionable decision, but probably it paid out. So yeah, he made it. Third is the, wait a minute, this guy here with the LPS and the Buffalo, 6,426, so about $300 behind this guy. It's pretty close here, but he was doing very strong at the beginning, but then the LPS had a time when it didn't go too great. he had to swallow a few times. The decision not to take loans and dump it into the Canadian, but instead to try to hold on to it and swallow a few times to get the big trains. Maybe that was a mistake. It's hard to tell. It kind of looks like that now. I mean, it was a very valuable corporation. The problem is he only held 50% of it. If he would have held 60%, he would have been in second. But yeah, that way he wasn't, and well, wasn't doing too great here. But yeah, hard to tell. Maybe this is a game where you really want to dump your starting companies into the Canadian and then start something new. I think basically this is the only company who made it all through the game, and it was a valuable company, but the player who owned it, yeah, he didn't really quite make the money he was hoping for. I mean, we should remember that there were some speculations with the shares going on. So the share value dropped from time to time. You know, if he could have run it basically from the start and then on a continuous path, then this, the LPS would have been a very, very valuable company, and the shares would have been much more valuable and maybe good enough to win. But the fact that there were some heavy stock manipulations going on to get additional money out of it, you know, things like selling for the par price and then buying it, or buying it for the par price and selling it right away in the next stock turn and stuff like that, that did cost him quite a bit of money, I think. Yeah, the fourth player is the investor, or the guy who started, who was only investing for a long time. And I always hope to see these investors doing better, you know. Well, they didn't. Don't really know why. I think maybe he should have sold his privates earlier. He couldn't sell his privates, which kind of was a disadvantage. However, he made a lot of money with them. So yeah, but that could have been his problem. In the end, he had a good working railway, maybe not quite as good as the others. All that might have added up. He had $5,971. That is clearly less than the first three. But still far ahead of this poor sucker here, president of the Canadian Pacific, with only 4,969. So this is really, really bad. And I'm not even sure where he actually made this mistake, because he was the president of the Great Western, who was making a lot of money. It was for a long time the strongest company out there. It had a great share value. Probably the problem was that he then couldn't start a really strong company after the Great Western was dumped. The Canadian Pacific wasn't doing that great. They were very isolated up here, so it was hard for them to really making a lot of revenue. In addition to that, the other players did not trust it, so they didn't invest that hard That again didn't allow them to buy a real good train. I think they also had to swallow a few times. So overall, I think the Canadian Pacific simply was doing poorly, and that was probably what brought him in this really bad position here. So yeah, just a few words about the game. I mean, obviously I absolutely love the 18xx series. This is my favorite game system. So this is also one of my favorite games. At the end, it dragged on quite a bit. The problem are the D-trains, you know. I mean, they are kind of fun, but it's so hard to always count all the runs they can make, you know. They can go that far, and it's simply easier if you have trains like in other games where you only have 8 trains or something like that. You can still make good runs, but it's not so crazy stuff like here. And that prolongs the game a lot during the end when you have, I don't know, we had here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 companies with a D train, and yeah, that was really pretty painful to count these suckers again and again and again. I mean, it is obviously kind of fun, you know. When you start running them, it's fun because you can make these hilarious runs of 700 plus or something, or even 800 ones. But as I said, after a while it becomes really fatiguing. The unique part of the game, or the very specific thing about the game, is definitely the loans and then the forming of the Canadian government, railways. That changes the game dynamics a lot, because you have, it's nearly a natural behavior to start a company, run it hard, take a lot of loans, then start a second company, try to get money from the first company into the second company, maybe take trains from the first company into the second company, stuff like that, and then dump it onto the Canadian. We've seen that with the 2 leaders. This guy did it, this guy did it. Interestingly, the last guy also did it, but as I said, I think he simply, there was no good company left for him to start. The Credit Valley was a great company, the Toronto, Hamilton, Buffalo also, but the Canadian was just too isolated. But this seems to be the way to go in this game, you know, that you just accept the ruin of the first company that you run, and it can be a good company, you know, it can make a lot of money, and we've seen that the Great Western and I think it was the Wellington, these were really valuable companies who made a lot of money, but they had too many loans, so they had to go into the Canadian. But at that time, the owners had enough time to transfer all the interesting stuff to their second company. But there, the timing is very, very important. And as I said, I'm not even sure if it makes sense to try to hold on to your company, to your starting company, like this guy did, because you cannot take that many loans if you want to do that, which means if you want to survive, you know, if you want to go into the big trains, you have to swallow sooner or later. That is something that you don't really have to do with the other companies. You can buy yourself a 3 train and do all or the track laying or so simply by taking loans, and then you can make it to the 6 trains and dump the company. This is not going to work if we want to make it through the whole game with a single company. You will have to swallow a few times, maybe 2, maybe 3 times, to be able to buy yourself a strong train. And if you want to go really big like the LPS, I don't know how often they actually swallowed. I think 3 times. That's a lot, and that gives away your starting advantage in a way, you know. If that would not have been necessary, they would have been far ahead when it comes to the share value. But this way, you know, they are basically in the middle of the pack. You have all these. They started much later. The CV, the THB, the BGG is even worth more than that, than the LPS. So that starting advantage that you get from constantly paying out, you know, and at a certain point you are simply in these upper regions here, and your shares are worth a ton. You cannot keep that starting advantage because you have to swallow, and then then you fall behind, obviously. In other games, every company has to do that, so it doesn't really matter, right? But you can't simply here decide not to do it and just take your loans, dump the company, and that's probably the way to play this game. In a way, it seems to me that this makes a bankruptcy pretty hard. It's interesting. Calendil does a playthrough, and the game crashed pretty soon. And I've also seen it when I played it multiplayer, but I find that kind of strange because usually you can avoid buying the big trains, you know. And if you are in a situation when you cannot afford a 4 train, or even a 3 train is usually good enough to survive until the 6 trains come out. So, boy, I mean, you really must have messed up here if you cannot survive in this game. I find it hard to understand a little bit. Yeah, I mean, basically you just have to take your loans and that should be enough to buy the trains. You just have to be careful. Another important thing is that you should be careful to start the companies at a price that you can afford enough shares to be allowed to operate, because, yeah, we've seen that it didn't happen. But you got to be careful in the early phases of the game that you have your 3 or 4 shares, even though the 2 or 3 trains might not be gone yet. Anyway, great game. Absolutely love it. Fantastic game. And yeah, hope to see you on the next video or on lonesomegamer.com. Bye.